The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning to some and good afternoon for others. I'd like to welcome you to today's course, which is complying with Standard 90.1 2016. Today is part one of two parts. The course is being brought to you by Mr. McHenry Wallace and Mr. Joe Derringer. Before we get started, I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. If you look to the right side of your screen, you will see the GoToWebinar control panel. And within the GoToWebinar control panel, you will have an option to ask questions. So if you guys have any questions throughout today's presentation, please feel free to type those questions in, and the instructors will answer those accordingly. And after the part two, at the end of part two, you will be presented a link and a passcode. Please use that link and passcode, which is the same link and passcode you was once you registered, you received. If you go there, you will see a copy of today's presentation, a PDF copy of today's presentation, as well as at the end of part two, it will be an evaluation link. And once you go to the evaluation link, you will be able to download your certificate of attendance. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and pass it over to you, Joe.
Okay. I'm Joe Derringer in the San Francisco Bay Area. Henry Mac Wallace is an engineer in Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area at the moment, right, Mac?
That's correct.
Okay, and we've been doing these sorts of things for some time. This morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, we'll do 3 hours of the first half of our presentation. This is normally a 6-hour presentation. So we will do an introduction and then cover lighting systems, and then cover HVAC through the mandatory portion of HVAC, and probably end today's session at the end of mandatory HVAC and the beginning of prescriptive. Am I doing that right, Mac?
That sounds like what we planned on.
Okay, and let's just jump into it. Mac and I both find this mode of presentation a little frustrating because we really like to engage the participants in these sessions, and we like questions. So we invite you to ask questions as we go. Brian will put the questions to whoever is not speaking, who will then interrupt the speaker to get responses. I think that's the way it generally works. So let's go to the next slide. Everything is copyright by ASHRAE, copyright 2017. Here are very brief bios of Mac and myself. We both have extensive history of involvement with 90.1, and we've been teaching 90.1 in its various versions for some time. This course is also an AIA CES registered provider course, so you can get, if you're an architect, you can get credit with the AIA. You can also get credit through ASHRAE. So here we go. It's the course that today and next Tuesday is approved for 6 general CE hours with no specific league credits here. The course outline is the introduction, which we're beginning now, and then a bulk of the course is covering technical system by technical system, lighting first, and then HVAC and mechanical, and then building envelope. Followed with service water, heating, other equipment, section 10, and power. And then we have a very brief summary. But the bulk of the course is showing to you how you comply with the different technical sections. The introduction has some historical and procedural and compliance issues that we discuss. We start with lighting because lighting is one of the most interesting sections that you'll you'll see as we get into it. Mac, any comments on this?
No, what you say, that keeps a pretty busy day. So you'll be hearing a ton of facts, and we'll do our best to make them somewhat interesting. But as Joe said, your questions are very helpful to
Yeah.
make this a good course.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, within Standard 90.1, God is in the details, and there's just a lot of details. It's hard to avoid. The learning objectives, and in the first one is to describe the background and development of Standard 90 since 1975. It's been a long time that it's been under development. Its requirements, compliance paths, describe updates to lighting and building envelope sections of the current version, identify updated HVAC requirements from previous versions, try to practice some techniques or approaches for achieving 30% or more energy savings from the 2004 version of Standard 90.1. And in reality, there is a notes section of one of the slides that shows that 2016 results in 30 to 35% energy savings or cost savings from 2004, if my memory is correct on that. And the final learning objective is to explore ways to improve system energy performance in buildings. So that's the learning objectives. Now we're jumping into the current state of adoption of various versions of Standard 90.1. And if you look by states, the states that have a white background have no statewide code, or they have home rule. The orange have less energy efficient than 90.1 2007. So I would say they tend to be behind in adopting the more recent version. The lighter orange is 2007 version of 90.1 or equivalent. That would be Indiana, West Virginia, Louisiana. The very light green would be 2010 or equivalent. And that would be Mississippi or Oregon. And sometimes a state will jump in its compliance from being really behind the curve to being closer to it. For example, Texas was way behind the curve and then jumped and is now between 2010, 2013, pretty up to date.
Actually, we're on 2013.
I
think the reason the DOE lists us this way is it's the IECC 2015, which I think the DOE puts kind of between 2010, a little less than the 2013 ASHRAE. So that's why I think they phase it that way. But of course, as we shall point out later, anytime you see the IECC 2015, then you can use the ASHRAE 90.1 2013 for compliance.
Right. So the states that are most progressive relative to Standard 90.1 is the dark green ones, and these states are doing better than 2013. And that's California, Washington State, Massachusetts. So you have a whole range of states.
So the only one I am aware of that adopts 2016 is the National Institute of Health, and if you're doing a lab or something that has their money in it, then as soon as we're published, the National Institute of Health adopts it. So you would need to comply with this 2016 if you were dealing with any of their buildings.
And they're all over the place, aren't they?
They're all over the place. Now, presently the federal government has not adopted 2016 as the code for the federal government. We're going through a determination, and we thought they were hopeful, the DOE was hopeful that they were going to be able to announce in October that the determination was complete, but it's been delayed a couple of weeks or so. So we should hear any minute now that they've determined that 90.1 2016 should be adopted, and that goes. That's the last step in a process, and then the actual adoption. So and that means that then within it starts the wheels turning to where all federal projects will have to meet 2016 and all that. So we'll go through a new cycle.
Okay. Then this slide shows the history of the energy impacts of 90.1 starting in 1975. And back in 75, the first version of the standard was estimated to result in a 40% reduction from current practice at that time. So all of these numbers showing percent savings from different versions are based on computer simulations relative to the previous version. So for 15 years or longer, up almost until 2000, you got maybe a 10 to 15% savings. And then starting in 2000, and especially going 2004, 2007, 2010, the combination of the Department of Energy and ASHRAE Board of Directors really put pressure on the 90.1 committee to produce substantial energy savings in the new versions of 90.1. So you can see the orange circle around the 2004 version. That has produced a 30% reduction from 1975. The 2010 version produced another substantial reduction. And the 2016 version with the arrow, the vertical arrow between 2004 and 2016, shows about a 34% reduction from 2004. So there's been really a very, very strong push to have each incremental version of Standard 90 produce increasing energy savings. And quite frankly, it's getting more and more difficult to achieve those savings because we've been pushing the limits of standard technology. Any comments on that, Mac?
No, just agreement that if you'll look at we're still making over 100 changes to each code cycle, but a lot of them are now more minutia than there's not any big sweeping ones that we can just knock the heck out of energy use. We have still not used any renewables, so that's one of the things that that a renewables requirement.
Since you brought that up, you want to talk about why that's the case, because we don't have the underlying standards for the renewable?
Basically, we're trying. The first thing we do when we add a system to the code is we add minimum efficiency requirements for that system, and we don't. They're existing now. There's not. Testing, standardized testing procedures, minimum standards set up so that we can do that. So that's the first step in getting the renewables in, is to get testing procedures and the tests set up and enough vendors to adopt those procedures, and generally they'll form a society or club or an organization, and then we start to regulate it. So that's kind of the steps we're making. But we are looking at those closely, because again, we within reason, we probably need to start requiring a little renewables as part of a project, or at least basing you could always use Appendix G to work around it, but at least working towards that.
Okay, I'm gonna move on here and try to catch it. We're a little bit behind. High performance buildings. If you start from that chart we just showed you, existing commercial buildings from the Commercial Building Energy Conservation Service 2003 data, the average building across the country, the actual consumption was 90,000 BTUs per square foot per year, or 284,000 or 284 kWh per meter square per year. So this was the baseline. Then if you look at models of existing stock or computer-based modeling, it wasn't 90, the models produced 79.2, or let's say 80,000 as a benchmark. Again, this is existing stock. And then the impact of the 2004 version of Standard 90 was at 70.7, or an improvement over the existing stock. And then the 2010 version dropped from 70.7 to 54.8, let's say 55, 55,000 BTUs per square foot a year for the 2010. This dropped in 2013 to 47,000, and then 2016 roughly we're perhaps somewhere less than 47, perhaps not as far down as 40, but we're getting into the area now of net zero capable buildings, net zero energy capable buildings. And the best practice is at 35,000, 25,000, depending upon the building type. And we're looking for pushing toward that. Standard 90 is unlikely because of the constraints on cost effectiveness, unlikely to get to net zero, but we keep getting closer to it.
Net zero capable is a building that if you add renewables to it, will reach net zero. So we're doing all the standard things you can do. And if you get down to that 25, 35, Joe said, then generally that's a reasonable amount of renewables to add to get you to net zero.
And there's a note at the bottom of the screen. There's an NBI, New Buildings Institute report. There's actually a series of reports from them on getting to zero. So if you do a web search on that, you can get more information. Very interesting stuff. Mac, I'm going to let you talk about these two tables. This is slides 11 and 12. These are from Standard 100.
Yes. Many times people ask us where they can find, if they're starting to work on a building or retrofitting a building, where they can find the EUI targets or what is a good EUI for this building. And ASHRAE Standard 100, which is energy use in existing buildings, is the best source I've found for those EUIs. As you can see, these are by building type and climate zone. And they give you good information on EUIs. So we've included that here to see if you, in case you were looking for that kind of information.
What I find interesting in these tables are the breakdown of different types of office buildings and the breakdown of climate zones 3, 4, and 5 into zones A, B, C, which is moist to dry mountain to Mediterranean climates. And you see marked differences in energy efficiency potentials for these. It all makes sense in looking at them. Again, if you look at these and you have any questions, let us know. It's a good table. But this is, again, existing buildings, right?
Existing buildings.
Yeah. Okay. Now, this is a nice summary of building energy use in the context of total energy use in the U.S. And you see that total energy use, 28% is transportation, 31% industrial, and buildings 41%. Pretty evenly split between residential and commercial. Residential 23%, commercial 19%. And then off on the right, you have a breakdown by energy end uses within residential and commercial. And you see in residential, space heating and cooling are the largest end uses, and in commercial, lighting is by far the largest, followed by heating and cooling and then ventilation. Okay.
What's interesting is, you can go ahead and anyway, what's interesting to me is that if the buildings we're building at the moment, the lighting has been reduced to such an extent that the shuffle, it's no longer the dominant source of energy use.
This is from the earlier CBEX data from 2003. All right, here we go.
Again, it's existing building.
Here's here's a comparison of the CBEX, Commercial Building Energy Conservation Service, National Survey of Buildings, 2003 and then 2012. 2003 is orange, 2012 is blue, and it shows you the different building types and the changes in energy use for building types. And food service has increased, but the average for all commercial buildings, office, and education have all decreased. And these are the only statistically significant changes since 2003. So this is interesting data. And then as Standard 90 makes its changes, this chart shows the changes from 2004 to 2007 to 2010, 2013, off on the right. For each building type, you see the amount of savings over the course of time over the last decade or so. And 2016 is not in here yet, but will be shortly. And Pacific Northwest National Labs acts as a technical support group within Standard 90, and they do a large number of Energy Plus computer simulations using 16 building types and I forgot how many climate zones. There are the 8 climate zones, but I think 17 different climate regions, and producing all of this data, which is then used along with economics to justify the cost effectiveness of the most recent standard version. And I'm going to go back to the next slide, which is more of a close-up of, it's more of a close-up of the various stages. And this slide now has 2016 in it, along with 2004, 7, 10, 13, and 16 on the right.
Yeah. So this eliminated the food service from the last slide, which were such a high energy use that caused the other ones to be so small. So we took those out, added the 2016, and actually this model is the current model being used by the PP&L for the DOE, and it is some changes we made in 2010 where we added computer rooms to buildings and made a little change in the way outside air was handled. And so this the answers of this model are slightly different than the previous one. So
you can see the changes in the large office when the large computer facility was added to the large office. And then there were some.
Yeah, and the reason the red one is a little funny is because we never bothered to pay P&L to rerun the 2007 models with the new model. So it's actually run without, it doesn't have computer rooms in it.
They didn't do it out of the goodness of their hearts. Oh.
They didn't know. So the 2004 we paid for them to redo. The 2010 was the active one at that time, and then we've used the same models ever since for 2013 and 2016.
All right, now we're shifting gears. So we have just completed discussion of the impacts of Standard 90 over time, both in the building stock and on typical buildings as defined in Energy Plus, a simulation program. These Energy Plus files are available online. You can download all of them, and if you run Energy Plus in your office, you can use these models and for various purposes. And we've done some of this over time. We're now shifting gears, and we're talking about the process for producing low energy, high performance energy buildings. And one of the concepts that Mac and I talk about frequently is a process of reducing the loads before you do anything to system efficiency. So you reduce plug loads, you reduce the envelope loads on the system, you reduce the lighting loads on the system. And once you do that, if you make substantial reductions in the loads, you make substantial reductions in your system. And sometimes if the load reductions are substantial enough, you can change the type of system you're using. You can use, for example, in Portland, you can use radiant heating and cooling instead of another type of system if the loads, peak loads are reduced enough. So this is an important concept. Something I'm missing, Mac?
No, you did an excellent job. The things up in the corner, I guess, do not impact the load, but they are covered by the code. Service, water heating, parking garage, both lighting and ventilation, and exterior lighting. That's why they're off to the side.
So one of the important aspects, this slide is missing the graphic.
Move on, Joe. They won't notice if you go by it really fast.
I went by it really fast.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really critical about designing buildings, and it's not a requirement in the standard yet, but I suspect it will become increasingly a requirement for designing for the standard, is to have an integrated design very early in the design process. You can produce most energy savings at the lowest cost if you have the whole design team talking to each other in a charrette basis early in the process. And any daylighting strategy really encourages that. Daylighting involves 6 or 7 different systems together. It's not a systemic approach, it's a design approach. And there's some examples on the left here of some really good daylighting solutions. A library just west of Cairo, Egypt, a state office building, a low-cost state office building in Wisconsin. Really good daylighting solutions. Natural ventilation cuts across systems as well. I'm not going to go into the detail of how it does it, but to do either natural ventilation or daylighting, you need to really have an integrated approach. One of the interesting things about natural ventilation is that your opportunities for natural ventilation are just a lot easier in the mountain region of the US or the West Coast Mediterranean climates. It's much more difficult to do natural ventilation in the humid eastern parts. You can do it, it's just more difficult. Okay, so this is really an important concept of integration of design efforts early on. If you're actually going to comply with Standard 90, you don't need to do your compliance documents until close to the end of the design process when you're producing your construction documentation. But if you're going to do it well, you really need to start early in an integrated approach and then follow it up with team communications throughout the design process. Before we leave that topic, Mac, any comments?
No, those of you involved in federal projects know that that's a big focus of what's going on in the federal market right now, and design charrettes and mandatory following of the 189 integrated design process is required.
Okay. So in the organization of Standard 90.1, it's been pretty much the same organization throughout its entire lifetime. You have 12 sections of the standard. The purpose, very short section 1, purpose, very short section 2 on scope, much larger section 3 on definitions, abbreviations, and acronyms. Section 3 has grown over time and become a really useful tool for clarifying the standard. And section 4, administration and enforcement. These are all 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all the procedural parts of Standard 90. Then sections 5 through 10 are the technical requirements for the major building systems. And we'll be covering those in some length. Section 11 is a whole building simulation for compliance with the standards, the energy cost budget method, and then there are normative references, part of the standard, in section 12. And then the appendices, a series of appendices, which I'm not seeing. Oh, here are the appendices. We're out of sequence here. All right, so here's the appendices in 2016. Appendix A, B, C, D are for mainly climate related and envelope related measures. Appendix G, toward the bottom, is really an important appendix. It's the performance rating method. It's the set of rules for how you do whole building energy simulations when you want to do better than the standard. And also in 2016, for the first time, Appendix G can also be used for doing whole building compliance. Appendix H is addenda, description information, and Annex 1 is reference standard reproduction from the climate standard 169. Any comments on this, Matt?
No.
Okay.
Just the reorganization of that's, for people that use the code all the time, you'll notice that those have been completely reorganized. And Appendix E, let's see.
Informative references.
Yeah, the one of the ones that is if you're working between some codes and stuff, now it's Appendix H, used to be Appendix F, is where we list and give a short description of all the changes, all the addenda that were accepted as part of this part of the standard, and those, if you're seeing if something changed or trying to track something that's happened to you between editions, it's a very good part of the standard to look at.
This is a very new slide, and it's going to be a little easier to understand, but it's an important slide. And then in terms of alternate compliance paths, you have your prescriptive path, the fourth box down on the left. You then have section 11, the energy cost budget method, or you have Appendix G, the performance rating method. All of these are compliance paths. And then you have your documentation, labeling, inspection, etc. So you have this is all the compliance paths, and then Appendix G is a new compliance path in 2016. And then I'm going back here because this was out of sequence. We're slide 22. For the entire time of Standard 90, the purpose and scope has been the same, except in 2010. And in 2010, some changes were made, and these are in red. So since 1975, the purpose of the standard has been to establish minimum energy efficiency requirements of buildings other than low-rise buildings for design. for design of the buildings. And then in 2010, it was expanded to include construction and a plan for operation and maintenance, and on-site renewable energy resources were added to the standard. We've already mentioned that we don't have any prescriptive requirements for renewable energy resources, but this is just a matter of time. So it's a major change in the purpose. And a major change in the scope was that new equipment or building systems specifically identified in the standard that are part of industrial or manufacturing processes are now included in the standard. It used to be excluded. And the biggest change there was computer rooms and computer systems. And this has been subject for a lot of debate and meetings. Mac, do you want to comment?
Yes, that was added in 2010. We added it mainly to capture data centers and computer rooms as included in the code, and left no doubt that you had to comply when you were building those type of buildings. Now, the wording, though, is very important. The new equipment or building specific systems specifically identified in the standards that are part of an industrial or manufacturing process. So the words specifically identified mean we have to name the industry that we're regulating. So we name computer rooms and data centers. If we wanted to do steel mills, we would have to say, we would have to add section on steel mills and give some requirements, and then the equipment would, even though the chiller is the same, maybe that's going in that steel mill for the process, we don't regulate those at this point because we haven't listed them. Even so, we didn't grab up all industrial or manufacturing. What the board of directors of ASHRAE said is, you got to go talk to those people. They can't just wake up one morning and be regulated when they didn't know it was coming. So if you're doing an industrial plant or something, if the HVAC systems for people or for people comfort, it's covered. If it's not covered, if it's for process, unless it's computer rooms, which we've specifically identified.
Okay.
That was more than you wanted me to say, wasn't it, Joe?
It's a lot. No, I'm concerned about our timing. So let's go back to our compliance paths in the new Appendix G. In 2016, the old Appendix G option is no longer available. Appendix G, or the performance rating method, was first introduced into the standard in 2004 as a way of primarily addressing lead or utility programs that were requiring energy use significantly better than the standard. And it used to be that Appendix G was only used for doing better, but it now can also be used for compliance. But you can no longer use the old procedure of comparing the prescriptive and mandatory requirements in the current version against your proposed design. We're now using a baseline of the 2004 version of the standard with an adjustment back to the current version. So it's a new requirement that Appendix G uses the prescriptive requirements of Standard 90.1 2004, which are now embedded in Appendix G in 2016. The major change in the process is very innovative, hopefully results in a lot of simplicity as it gets settled in. Mac, any comments on that? We're fine.
Yeah, we'll wait. I'll wait till the next slide or two.
Okay, here's the calculation that you use. It's pretty complex. Your percent savings using Appendix G is 100 times PECIT, which is your performance cost index target, which is defined by the equation here, where you have a baseline building unregulated energy cost, a baseline building energy regulated cost, and you have a building performance factor, which comes from a table, a new table 4.2.1.1, which adjusts from 2004 to 2016. And it does it on a whole building basis. And then you have your PCI, your performance cost index, which is your proposed building performance divided by your baseline building performance. So this is a complicated set of equations and variables for getting your calculated savings from Appendix G. And then here is building performance factor for from table 4211, and then here is further example, and I'm not seeing the chart that I had put into the notes page showing up on my screen. But in the notes page on this slide, there should be a copy of the table with an office building in climate zone. I think it's climate zone 5A with 60.60 is the building performance factor. And then more equations you can follow through. So in this case, we have a 9.7% savings for this set of inputs. Mac, you want to talk about this? This is.
I think I'll let it go until, it's probably too complicated to be able to do over the telephone or on this concept, but I think the calculations are clear. We color coded them to make it easy for you to follow, and it's just an exercise in simple mathematics and using that one number from the table. The interesting thing is it was set up and broke out so that the regulated cost and the unregulated costs are separate, so that if you are doing a federal type building and you do get to do away with the unregulated energy cost, not included in your calculation, then it is separate and easily removed. So it's also done that way so that you don't apply the factor, the discount for the 2004 to anything but something that has been regulated. So there is good logic there. And the exciting thing is that people have asked for a performance type approach, and this is going down that path so that we are able to give you one model. It's still a model, but that you can hit a certain number, and it was the number based on the 2004, which we picked as a baseline for everything we're doing, and that will never change. So that you can develop models, you can develop people that write software can do baseline models that can be generated from that 2004 year and never change them again. So every year the table will change, the discount table will change, but the rules and the type of model you're building for your baseline will be the same. So you can invest some time and energy into building those baseline models based on 2004.
So the 2016 version of Appendix G is a major change, a major innovation. Mac and I are actually doing a 3-hour course in Chicago for the ASHRAE winter meeting on Appendix G compliance, and it's pretty interesting. There are a few kinks in the system that are being worked out, but I think it's a really well done innovative approach to the performance approach. And then here, this is a different table where you can update from the 2000 update to the 2010 version or the 2013 version in addition to the 2016 version. And then here is the federal projects.
Right, and those are important because I understand that maybe the USGBC will accept these calculations, and currently the USGBC ties to our 2010 version of the standard, so that you can use the same approach with that table and show how compliance with and how much better you did with one model for compliance. And this just shows what I mentioned earlier about the federal projects, how you can easily break out the non-regulated loads.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, we're shifting gears now, and we're moving from the introduction section and talking about the development of Standard 90 over time to the discussion of the first of a series of technical sections. And the rest of the time today, we will be talking about just two of those technical sections. The first one is lighting. And the lighting section is important to understand because it has a major impact upon the loads on the HVAC system. And it involves essentially two different elements. It involves lighting controls, which are mandatory requirements, and then the limits on the lighting power density that you're allowed to install in different spaces of different types. So we'll go through lighting, and then we will do the mandatory section of HVAC today. So here we go on lighting. The lighting requirements went through a series of improvements since 1999, so the last 16, 17 years. In 2004, there was a major reduction in the allowable lighting power densities by the standard, like 20–30% reduction. So it was a major change, 2004. And then from 2004 to 2007, it was like the lighting committee on Standard 90 took a vacation. There were a few definitions added, there were a few efficacy requirements added, but no major changes. And literally, it felt like they took a vacation. Then from 2007 to 2010, another major reduction in lighting power densities and major refinements in control requirements, including new control mandatory requirements for daylighting. So we'll see this. And then from 2010 to 2013, an improvement in the lighting, I think an improvement in the lighting, daylighting control requirements, and then further reduction in density requirements. And then from 2013 to 2016, major reduction in lighting power density requirements and further requirements or further refinements in control. So this is basically what's happened to the lighting section over the last 15, 16, 17 years. So the scope of the requirements in lighting, the requirements apply to the interior spaces of buildings, to the exterior building features, lighting of the facades, etc., and to the exterior building grounds lighting, provided that the lighting of the grounds is through the building's electrical service. And the requirements apply to new construction, to alteration in existing buildings, and when the lighting requirements in an existing building are changed, the requirements of Standard 90 are triggered when 20% or more of the connected load in a space or area are replaced. And this percentage keeps changing over time. When you calculate interior lighting power, you need to include all power used by a lighting fixture, or as the lighting people call it, a luminaire. The lamp power, the ballast power, the transformer power, and the control device power. All of these factors need to be calculated in the watts used for the system. And we've seen these compliance diagrams before for the lighting section. You start at the top in the lighting diagram. You have general requirements, you have definition of compliance path, you have mandatory provisions, which in my view are all of the control requirements. And then you have the lighting power limits defined by section 9.5, the building area method, which is a very general method for defining lighting power limits. And then a space by space method, which is a more detailed method by which you're also allowed to get additional credits. And then you have Section 11, the energy cost budget method. These are the requirements within the lighting section. The mandatory lighting requirements include three major sections: lighting controls, Section 942, exterior building lighting power, and Section 943, and a very important new section. And in this area, the functional testing requirements during construction is something that the lighting section requires functional testing requirements. The other sections do not yet require such functional testing requirements, but the lighting section does. So in terms of controls, there are 9 controls for interior lighting controls. Local control, restricted to manual on, restricted to partial automatic on, bi-level lighting control. I'm going to talk about each of these in a follow-up slide, separate controls. Automatic daylight responsive controls for side lighting from windows, automatic daylight responsive control for top lighting or skylights or roof monitors, and then automatic partial off, automatic full off, and scheduled shutdown or shut off. These are the 9 interior lighting controls. Before we go in and talk about each one, what's important to understand is by looking at the space by space lighting power density method, which we'll come back to later on and talk about it in more detail. What we see here for office spaces, the first line down, enclosed office less than 250 square feet, enclosed offices greater than 250 square feet, or open offices, you can see you have a lighting power density, LPD, in watts per square foot, 0.93, 0.93, 0.81. So you have a different lighting power density for each type of space. You have a RCR, or room cavity ratio threshold. It's a number that lets you assess the difficulty of lighting space by the space geometry. But the significant thing for lighting controls is that lighting controls are specified as required by space type. So across the top here are the 9 different types of lighting control. And you can see that in the enclosed office and open office, you can see that some lighting controls are required and others aren't. For example, automatic partial off is not required, but automatic full off is required for small offices, or there's an option of full off or scheduled shut off. So you can do one of the two. You could do restricted manual on or restricted partial automatic on for the enclosed office larger than 250 square feet. So these vary by space type. So for restrooms, for the visually impaired, the only required controls are automatic daylight controls for side lighting and top lighting, and automatic full off. And the same for all other restrooms. So depending upon the type of space you have, the control type and its requirement varies. And so it's important to understand this as we go through and talk about each of the space types. So before I do that, we're almost at the hour, and let's take a 5-minute break at this time. Brian, can we stop here and come back in 5 minutes? Hello?
Guess not, Joe. You want to go an hour and a half and give them 10 minutes so they can do something, or you want to stop now?
Well, we had agreed to this.
Oh, I wasn't on the phone. Sorry. All right, let's just stop. We'll be back
We'll be back
at
at 5.
exactly one minute past 1 at Eastern Standard Central Time.
1 minute past the hour. Yes. Okay.
Joe, you back?
I am indeed.
All
Okay, okay. Now we're going to go through the 9 different lighting controls. Now the purpose of all these lighting controls is to reduce the amount of time that the installed lighting system is used. Many of the lighting control requirements are automatic lighting control. This first one is simply local control, and it's a manual control. And the requirement is that there shall be 1 or more manual lighting controls in the space that controls all of the lighting in the space. And there are limits on the amount of space that each control can impact. Typically, it's no larger than 2,500 square feet, or for very large spaces, no larger than 10,000 square feet. So very important that there be 1 or more local controls in the space. There are some exceptions to it, but that's basically it. The second control, I'm hearing some echoes. Wonder what that is. Anyhow, the second control is an automatic control, and that is when you have turned the lights in a space off, either the night before or from a occupancy or vacancy sensor. When the lights are turned back on, you cannot turn any of the lighting on automatically. All of the lighting must be turned on manually. And the only exception of note is that you can't have the manual on if the operation would endanger the safety or security of the room or the building occupants. So it's a restriction to manual on, and it just limits the automatic turning on of lights at a certain time or what have you. And then there's a restriction to automatic partial on, where no more than 50% of the lighting power for the general lighting in a space shall be allowed to be automatically turned on. So if we have a large open office and there's a restriction to have partial automatic on, only 50% of the lights, the general lights, can come on. If you want the rest of the lights, you have to turn them on manually. And at the bottom of this slide are some daily operating schedules for a typical office space. And this, the schedule on the left shows a typical office schedule without a lot of the type of controls being used by Standard 90. The section in the middle shows my estimate of the typical daytime office schedule from midnight to noon to midnight, from the type of schedule requirements or control requirements in 2004. And the one on the right shows my estimation of the type of schedule of lights being on from the automatic control requirements in 2016. So these are my estimates that you would use for a computer input for scheduling lighting controls. And I stress these are my estimates. The standard does not require specific lighting schedules. They give you the requirements, but they don't tell you the specific schedule impacts of those requirements. The next, the fourth control is a bi-level lighting control, which I think is really quite useful. It says that the general lighting in a space shall be controlled so as to provide at least one intermediate step. So if you're in a small open office space, the general lighting needs to have a control so that it's on or off, or you have something in the middle between 70% and 30%, an intermediate step. And this is allowing you to have dimming lights. I can remember being in a conference area for 6 to 10 people in a large federal office building, and you didn't have the medium control, and when you turned the lights on in the conference room, it was too bright, and you had no choice of getting an intermediate session. So I really like this type of control. And then this is the fifth control. This is automatic control for daylight responsive controls for side lighting. And it says that if you have any space where the combined input power of all general lighting completely or partially within the primary side lighted areas is 150 watts or greater, the general lighting in the primary side lighted area shall be controlled by photo controls. So if you have windows, you have a primary side lighted area next to those windows, and you must control the lighting in the primary side lighted area separately from the rest of the space. And there are some exclusions for obstructions 5 foot or higher, and there are specific rules for how far past the edge of the glass you go. But it's a mandatory requirement for automatic daylighting controls by photo control sensors. In 2000, this was in 2010. In 2013, a secondary side lighted area was added. So if you have a space with windows where the combined input power of lighting completely within the primary or secondary side lighted areas is 300 watts or greater, then you have to have 3 types of controls in this space. Primary side lighted area control, secondary side lighted area control, and the rest of the space. Separate controls for each of those. Furthermore, the control system for the side lighted areas shall have the following characteristics. The calibration adjustments shall be readily accessible in the space. The general lighting in the secondary side lighted area shall be controlled separately and independently from the general lighting in the primary side lighted area that shows you the 2 areas. The photo control shall reduce electric lighting in response to available daylight using continuous dimming or with step dimming, with at least one control step that's between 50 and 70% of design lighting power, a second control step between 20 and 40%, and a third control step that turns off all controlled lighting. This is pretty specific, these requirements, and this is a mandatory requirement for the applicable spaces. There are some exceptions. If the top of an adjacent structure, here's your window, and inside is to the right, if the building is within X feet of the window and is higher than 2X dimension, then you don't have to have daylighting in the side lighted area. The second exception is where the total glazing area in the space is less than 20 square feet. Total glazing area. So it doesn't, it's a pretty small glazing area as a limit. And then all retail spaces are exempted from or accepted from the side lighting controls. So then we go to automatic daylight responsive controls for top lighting, whether it's skylights or roof monitors. And in this case, retail spaces are not accepted. You have the same type of control requirements and step dimming control requirements as you have for the side lighted area. You have specific ways of calculating when there are obstructions, or what the obstruction height is, and the distance from the roof monitors. I won't go into all the details about this. The exceptions for the automatic daylight responsive controls for top lighting include daylight areas under skylights where it's documented that the existing adjacent structures or natural objects, big trees, mountains, whatever, block direct beam sunlight for more than 1,500 daytime hours per year between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. And then daylighted areas where the skylight visible transmittance is less than 0.4. And then a third one in each space within buildings in climate zone 8, that's in Alaska, where the input power of the general lighting within the daylight area is less than 200 watts. So the exceptions are pretty minimal. This is an important set of new mandatory requirements that covers a wide range of space types. And then we have the next requirement after the daylighting requirements is automatic partial on, partial off. So these are control devices, space sensors, occupancy sensors, vacancy sensors, that the general lighting power in the space shall be automatically reduced by at least 50% within 20 minutes after all occupants leave the space. So if we're in a large conference room or a training facility where we have a break for lunch or whatever, and we have 20 people in there or 22 people, and everybody leaves the space, 20 minutes later, 50% of the lights go off automatically. So that's the effect of this rule, automatic partial off. And then we have automatic full off, which is the same as the automatic partial off, but within 20 minutes after all occupants leaving the space, all the lights go off, except for emergency lighting, etc. And the control device shall not control more than 5,000 square feet. So that's the limit on the size of the space. And then scheduled shut off is that all lighting in the space not exempted by exception 1 of 911 shall be automatically shut off during times when the space is scheduled to be unoccupied using either a time of day device or a signal from an automatic control device. So if we're in an office building and the 10th floor, it has an open office landscape, and the schedule on the 10th floor is that everybody leaves at 5:30, then there can be a time of day device that turns off the lighting in that space at 5:30 or 6. And that device shall have independent control sequences, so it's not controlling more than 25,000 square feet, not controlling more than one floor, and be programmed to account for weekdays and holidays. And then any manual control for the scheduled shutoff that is going to override the scheduled shutoff. So if somebody is staying and working late in this open office landscape, the override cannot be more than 2 hours per activation during shutoff periods, and the override cannot control more than 5,000 square feet. So if the overall scheduled shutoff controls up to 25,000 square feet, any override cannot control more than 5,000 square feet and not more than 2 hours per activation. So if somebody turns their area back on at 6, they're going to have to do it again at 8, and do it again at 10, do it again at midnight, depends how late they're running. So this is all of the interior lighting controls. We now switch to lighting controls for parking garages, and there are a few controls for parking garages. We'll come back to the interior lighting controls when we get to the lighting power density a little bit later on. Okay, Parking garages shall have automatic lighting shutoff per section 9411. The lighting power for each luminaire shall automatically be reduced by 30% when no activity is detected in a lighting zone for 20 minutes. So this is similar to the 20 minutes of the interior spaces. The maximum zone size for parking is 3,600 square feet. And daylight transition zones and ramps without parking are exempted from this requirement. Additional parking garage lighting power or lighting controls include lighting for covered vehicle entrances and exits. They're separately controlled by device, automatically reduce lighting by 50% or more from sunset to sunrise. And the daylight control in parking garages, power to luminaires within 20 feet of any perimeter wall structure shall be automatically reduced in response to daylighting if there is a net opening to wall ratio of at least 40% and there are no exterior obstructions within 20 feet. So there's a simpler set of controls for daylighting of parking garages as well. Now we'll cover a different topic, and that's the exterior building lighting power. We've got a more recent, this is a really interesting requirement for exterior lighting power. If you're in Yosemite, your lighting power allowances vary by where your building is located, from climate zone or lighting zone 0, which is undeveloped areas of national parks, state parks, etc. Then you have developed areas of national parks, state parks. You have residential zoning, neighborhood business districts, all other areas, all other urban areas essentially. And then high activity commercial districts would be downtown Dallas, downtown San Francisco, downtown Chicago, or Manhattan would be climate zone or lighting zone 4. But in undeveloped areas of national parks, this would be Yosemite or Yellowstone or equivalent areas. There's no outdoor lighting allowed. There are no allowances. And then developed areas of national parks would be in, for example, Yosemite near me, there are a couple hotels and restaurants in the developed area. But these have very restricted levels of outdoor lighting. And then as you get higher density, the levels of outdoor lighting allowed increase. It's a very important concept. Here's the table of tradable types of outdoor lighting requirements. And you would have, for example, in this table, walkways less than 10 feet wide, walkways 10 feet wide or greater, plaza areas, landscaping areas, parking areas and drives, entry canopies, loading docks, sales canopies, outdoor sales areas, all these different types. Depending upon the zone, if you're in Yosemite, undeveloped areas, there's no allowance anywhere for any outdoor lighting. In developed areas of such places, you can have a modest amount of outdoor lighting, either in watts per square foot or watts per linear foot. And then as the density of the developed area, whether it's a residential area or it's a strip commercial area anywhere in the US, or it's a high density urban area. So your walkway is less than 10 feet wide for a developed area of a national park, 0.5 watts per linear foot. In Manhattan, it's 0.7 watts per linear foot. Parking areas in a developed area of Yosemite, 0.03 watts per square foot. In Manhattan, it's 0.08 watts per square foot. So these are the variations that you get. The second type of lighting power requirement outside are non-tradable requirements. And these are for areas where there are life safety or security requirements. Automated teller machines and night depositories, entrances and gateways, inspection stations at guarded facilities, uncovered loading areas for law enforcement, fire, ambulance, other, etc. In general, you either have no allowance if you're in an undeveloped area of a park, or the allowances are all the same. There's no variation for density of development. It has to do more with safety. So the only thing that varies in these non-tradable is the amount of lighting you're allowed on the exterior facades of the building, and you're not allowed any allowance in either non-developed or developed areas of parks. And the allowance on the facade for a suburban or residential area, 0.1 watt per square foot of facade, and it goes double that in a high density urban area. So these are the lighting power requirements outside. And here's an example, two examples. This is lighting outside of the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco on the left, and the lighting on a beautiful old stone courthouse in Toronto on the right. So that covers all of the section on lighting controls. Mac or Brian, do we have any questions so far?
There's only one question, and it's way back for me on when I was talking about what kind of equipment. The question is, if you have a chiller that serves both the computer room and the offices in a building, how would that work? And since you asked the question concerning a computer room and offices, then all the systems would have to comply with the standard, because we do cover computer rooms. Now, if you'd ask whether a steel mill and an office had on one chiller had to comply, the chiller itself would have to meet all of our energy requirements, all of our minimum energy efficiencies, because it was serving the office area, and so it would have to. Any kind of other equipment that's in the process would be exempt, but because the chiller was serving at least partially comfort areas, it would have to comply with the standard. There is, just because you did ask about computers, and we'll close this out, there is two things that we'll cover a little bit later when we're talking. There is a new standard 194, which is specifically for computer rooms. It hasn't been adopted by anybody, but you should be able to use it maybe and talk to your authority having jurisdiction about that. And then we have an alternate compliance path for computer buildings, data centers really, which uses PUEs, which is an energy ratio thing, well, I'll explain later, that allows you to show compliance. But you would still have to use, because it's mandatory, the chiller itself would always have to meet the energy efficiency requirements. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, so we've just covered the lighting control requirements included in 90.1 2010, 2013, 2016. Subtle differences in each of the variations over time, but since 2010, major addition to lighting control requirements. This requirement, I expect to see much more of this type of requirement in all sections of 90.1 in the future, but for right now, you have a functional testing requirement during construction that somebody has to come in and perform functional testing of the lighting control requirements. The occupancy sensors, there are three types: occupancy sensors, automatic time switches, and daylighting controls. And there's a limit on who can do this testing. So the first time this was added, it was in 2010. It was very general, and then 2013 became much more detailed, has not increased in detail in 2016, but it's really important. So for occupancy sensors, Somebody has to certify that the sensor has been located and aimed in accordance with manufacturer's recommendations. For projects up to 7 occupancy sensors, all sensors must be tested. For large projects with more than 7 sensors, the testing shall be done for each unique combination of sensor type and space geometry. What do you have to do? You have to confirm that the automatic time switch control, that's for occupancy sensors. There's more detail, but it's not in this slide presentation. For automatic time switches, you have to confirm that the automatic time switch control is programmed accordingly for weekday, weekend, holiday, that the automatic time switch programming, you have to document for the owner that the programming is well set up, and you have to verify that the correct time and date are properly set in the time switch and that any backup is installed. More on time switches. I won't go into that detail. And for daylighting control, that all control devices have been properly located, field calibrated, and set for appropriate thresholds and threshold lighting levels, and that daylighting control lighting loads actually adjust to the appropriate light levels in response to available daylighting, and that the location where the calibration adjustments are made is readily accessible. One of the early daylighting systems that I worked on in a building in Minnesota, this type of testing was not done. There was a very good design, but the installation was really screwed up and the system didn't work, wasn't calibrated, wrong number of devices in the wrong location, 0% savings from the daylighting. The utility was paying for the incremental cost, forced the contractor to go back and change the design, essentially in response to these type of functional testing, and produce the 50% reductions that were originally intended. So it's really important that these things occur. The individual responsible, for those of you familiar with commissioning and who does commissioning and how independent the commissioning person needs to be from the design and construction teams, within the Standard 90 functional testing for lighting, the individual responsible shall not be directly involved in either the design or construction of the process. They can be down the hall in the same firm, but they can't individually be involved in the design or construction. And the person that is doing the functional testing must provide documentation certifying that the installed controls meet or exceed all the documented performance criteria. So it's an interesting mid-ground of independence on who can do the functional testing. Okay, we're doing a major change here, and I'm going to go through this quickly because we're a little bit behind time. Standard 90 has for a long time set limits on the amount of lighting power you can install in different spaces. What the watts per square foot or the total wattage for the space is. It's a limit on the installed capacity. And there are two ways of doing it. There's a building area method where you take the whole building or major use divisions in a building and you set a limit on that major area or the whole building without looking at the details of the different space types. The second method is the space by space method. Let's look first at the building area method. And here are the lighting power density allowances for the building area method. So your office building has an allowance of 0.79 watts per square foot. Your retail facility, 1.06 watts per square foot. And if we look historically, and we take these two space types, the office space type, in 2001, the allowance was 1.3 watts a square foot. 2004, it went to 1 watt. 2007, 1 watt. 2010, 0.9 watts. 2013, 0.82 watts, and in 2016, 0.79 watts. So it's systematically reduced. It's now only 30. It's now a savings of 39% from the original 2001 level. For retail, it went from 1.9 down to 1.06, a 44% savings. And the 2016 version of the standard had modest savings from 2013 for offices 4%, for retail 16%. So this table gives you a pretty good historical summary of the changes made, and you'll see that there are some areas with a pink background. This is where the committee went, whoops, we went too far previously. We're going to go back up a bit in the requirements or the limits. It's a good summary.
Joe, just I don't think you said this, but you might have. The 2016 is the first year that the baseline is based on LEDs. So before that, they never felt that way.
That's overstating it. It's the baseline includes LEDs where appropriate.
Okay. I'm just saying that they never were, the committee never allowed them in before 16.
But it's not saying that LEDs are used everywhere as the baseline. It could be a mixture depending on what's appropriate. So, and that contributes to some of the reductions from 2013 to 2016. Okay, so doing the calculations, here we have a very simple space, a one-story office, 100 feet by an office building by 90 feet, 9,000 square feet. The lighting power density in 2007 was 1 watt a square foot, 2010, 0.9, 2013, 0.82, 2016, 0.79. Here are the, at the bottom of the slide, excuse me. I had to sneeze, but didn't. The lighting power total allowance in 2007 was 9,000 watts for this space, or this office, one-story office. In 2010, it dropped to 8,100 watts, 2013 to 7,380, and in 2016, dropped to 7,110 watts. So you're seeing the limit, the reduced limit of installed capacity. As technology improves, the capacity has been reduced. Now, the committee has been very careful not to result in lighting efficiency or lighting levels, the luminous levels that are not sufficient for the population of the spaces. So this is really an impact of improved technology. Now here's an exercise that we would normally do, an in-class exercise. We've shown you what the exercise is. You can do it on your own. It's pretty straightforward on how to do it. It's how to calculate the total lighting power for a 3-story building that has the first floor is retail and the second and third floors are office spaces. The second exercise is if you have a first floor retail that is using more than the allowable wattage and the second and third floor use less, does the whole building comply if you take and calculate the combined or add up all the spaces? I'll let you do that. Yeah, but these are two different examples. Now the space by space method, this is where we get into a detailed analysis of the lighting allowances space by space. So if it's a small office space, less than 250 square feet, or it's a larger enclosed space or an open office or a corridor, or a conference room, or a print shop within an office building, or it's a toilet facility. All of these different spaces have their own requirements. So here we have 6 different tables showing you the lighting power density allowances in watts per square foot, the room cavity ratio or the room shape allowances, which essentially, if you have a strange shape that's hard to light, you get an extra 20% of lighting power added. So here are the various lighting power densities on the left, and then all of the control requirements that are on the right-hand side. Here's first set of spaces, second set, third set, fourth set, fifth set, sixth set. There's 7 different tables shown in this presentation, and we're including all of them so you can see what the range of requirements are. It's pretty self-explanatory in how to use this. Now, the real benefit, well, here is the space-by-space method, the percent improvement or reduction in efficiency from 2013 to 2016, from 15, 13 up to 26, 29%. So substantial reduction in allowable space-by-space installed wattages. Now, when you're doing the space-by-space method, it's much more complicated, more detailed. You get some benefits. You can claim extra lighting power to be installed if you have an odd-shaped room, or for decorative lighting, or for lighting of retail display areas, or for control adjustments. These are 4 ways you can increase the amount of lighting that can be installed in a space. So it's an advantage of using the more detailed lighting power method. For the room cavity ratio, you're given an equation here, the RCR equation, and I won't go through that in detail, but it's all laid out here, and there's an example for you to see. But essentially, you get a 20% increase in the amount of power in the space. And if you have a corridor that's less than 8 feet wide, the adjustment is allowed. And here's an example of decorative lighting. So here you have a corridor where you have your corridor lighting in the ceiling. Then you have wall washers providing light for decorative lighting, and then another set of wall washers for lighting the information panels on the right. In 2006, this maximum allowance for decorative lighting used to be a watt per square foot on a use it or lose it basis. You couldn't transfer it to other spaces. And in 2016, it's been reduced to 0.75 watts per square foot. For retail display lighting, you can see the allowances just for the display area, not for the whole room of a retail area, but for the display area where you're showing your shirts or your jewelry or whatever. And you get, in 2007, depending upon the type of material you were showing for jewelry and crystal, you got an extra 4.2 watts. 2007, that went down to 2.6 to 2.5 to 1.88 for jewelry, crystal, and china. For vehicles, sporting goods, and retail area 2, it went from 1.7 to 0.6 to 0.45. So you can see there is additional allowance provided, but it has gone down. And partly this is a result of the penetration of LED technology into retail display situations. And then here is some adjustment factors where you can reduce the amount of lighting for different types of lighting controls in different spaces. So these are the 4 areas where you're allowed to increase the amount of lighting in a space for the space-by-space method. I've gone through that quickly to keep us on track so that Mac has adequate time for presenting the HVAC material. That's the end of the lighting section. Do we have any questions on lighting, Brian or Matt?
I
We're
don't
done?
see any, Joe. Brian?
Okay, okay. Mac, I'm going to turn it over to you. Are you going to change the presentation and do it, or am I going to keep going
Yeah.
and click the clicker?
I'll take the presentation, Joe.
All right.
You see my screen now?
I see your screen.
I'll take over then. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to start on the HVC and mechanical sections. Joe's done an excellent job of showing us how to reduce our lighting in the building, so that'll reduce the size of our mechanical system. And now we'll go through and see how we take it from there to cool and heat the building. So whenever you're looking at standard 90.1, we'll all sections have the same numbers. So it'll be, for envelope, it's 5.3, 5.4, 5.5. For lighting, it's 9.3, 9.4, 9.5. So the simplified approach is always 0.3. Now, HVAC is the only one that uses a simplified approach. So you'll see a 0.3, but it'll just say not used in envelope. And then you'll go to 6.4, always mandatory, and everything in mandatory, you cannot get out of it. It has to be done. And then 6.5 is prescriptive path. That means that you can run a model, or if you don't want to do that, you can either use the section 11, the energy cost budget method, or now you can use Appendix G to show compliance. So those are the paths, and no matter what section you're in, it's important to note if it's 0.4 or 0.5. Okay, divisions of HVAC section 6. We have general, which we'll go through. Then we have the compliance paths, which will tell you how to comply with the major rules. And then the simplified approach, which we will not go into at this point. At the end of the presentation, we will use it as a recap. So for compliance, section 6 has the simplified approach down here at 6.3, and then it has prescriptive path, which is the way you would normally, if you're going to use ComCheck or to show compliance, then you would use this prescriptive path, 6.5. And then we have alternate compliance, 6.6. This is that computer room or data center compliance that I mentioned earlier. Or you can always go to energy cost budget, or now you can go to Appendix G performance rating. So we have several ways to show compliance, but note that except for the simplified approach, which includes all the mandatory provisions anyway, you always have to do 6.4. Joe, I think you're unmuted, because I hear little things coming from somewhere. Push that little green circle up there. Well, I told you I wasn't going to do it. I'm going to use a simple building example to show you about compliance paths. So an existing warehouse office, this would be, again, this would fall under our simple buildings. Existing warehouse office, the warehouse is unconditioned, it has no heating or cooling. The office has gas, electric, AC unit, and we want to modify to expand the office and convert the warehouse into a training room, storage, and office. So this is what the existing building looks like. It's got the office space in the front, typical office warehouse, unconditioned warehouse in the back. Now, if we decide we're going to turn this into a training facility, we could add a training floor, training room here, take those roll-up doors out, put in glass, add an office, a storage building, increase the amount of office space in the front, and add a new vestibule, because in certain regions of the country, colder regions, vestibules are required. Now, the existing building had one unit for the office, this red unit up front, and we're going to have to add a little ductwork to that to serve the office. We're going to add a new 7.5 ton AC unit for the training room, and then we're going to add a 1 ton heat pump for the office. We'll have an electric wall heater in the storage room. So question, do the new HVAC systems equipment have to comply? Whenever there is a change in space conditioning, whenever unconditioned or semi-heated spaces in a building are converted to conditioned spaces, such conditioned spaces shall be brought into compliance with all the requirements of this standard that would apply to the building envelope, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, service water heating, power, lighting, and other systems and equipment as if the space were new. Conclusion, new systems and equipment must comply. So a key to the understanding 9.1 is conditioned spaces. That triggers most of the compliance in the standard is if we're heating or cooling the space. Now, does the existing HVAC system have to be upgraded? That red unit in the front. Compliance shall not be required for equipment that is being modified or repaired, but not replaced, provided that such modifications and or repairs will not result in an increase in the annual energy consumption of the equipment. Conclusion, existing unit, including thermostat and other controls, need not be upgraded and may be repaired without invoking full compliance, provided the repairs do not increase energy use. So notice that last part of the sentence, provided the repairs do not increase energy use. Remember, we are providing some air from that unit to the new office areas in the corridor, so that will increase energy use on that unit. But we have one more exception. Can the existing system be used to condition newly conditioned space? When HVAC or service water heating to an addition is provided by existing HVAC or service water heating systems and equipment, such existing systems and equipment shall not be required to comply with the standard. However, any new systems or equipment installed must comply with specific requirements of the code. Conclusion, existing systems may be used to condition new space, but any new equipment must meet the standard. For example, new duct must be insulated. So what has to meet the requirements of the standard? Not the existing red unit, but the new ductwork from that red unit, the new 7.5 ton unit for the training facility, the new office unit, the 1 ton mini split, and the 300 or the heat pump and the little wall heater will have to comply. Now, if you look up the requirements for the minimum efficiency from the tables, you'll get these requirements that must be met by the new equipment. Notice that the electric resistance wall heater has no requirements. You cannot find that item in the standard. So that item can be used any way you want to use it. You can, if you can't find it, it doesn't mean you can't use it. It means you can use it without restriction. Now, an electric wall heater happens to be 100% efficient, but still you can use it without restriction. And that's why we work so hard to add so much of the equipment to the tables, because whenever we add one, then we've added some restrictions. Now, so on the simplified approach, which this small building applies to, we have the same requirements in general as the main code. So the small system not required for, we don't have to add an economizer to the existing system because it does not need to be upgraded, and we don't need to add an economizer to the office unit because it's less than 54,000 BTUs. But we do have to have an economizer on the training room unit because it's so big. So that went through that first section about compliance for, sorry, I have my computer plugged in, but my battery light's blinking, so something is not right. Here, let's make sure this is work. All right, I think I saved the day. Sorry about that. So things we must do for all compliance paths. We've got to do the mandatory provisions, which include the equipment efficiency, the calculation requirement, controls and diagnostics, and HVAC systems construction and installation. Then this is the prescriptive path, and this prescriptive path we can avoid by using other compliance paths. But so you can see a breakdown of the list. Now, the reason I do that is if you're using this as a companion, if you're using a output of the show as a companion, this gives you a short list of places to look for things. So 651 is where the economizer's in. 655 is heat rejection equipment, and so I've given you this list of things so you'll have it as a reference. Completing the requirements. You'll use you could use an alternate compliance path, such as 6.6, which is for computer room systems, and then the tables at the end of the section in 6.8, they're referenced and they're actually part of 6.4, but they're contained in section 6.8. You'll get the minimum tables, and you'll see those tables, and they'll list all the requirements for efficiency. Now, when we work on the standard, and to me it's a good way to start a project or to look at the energy efficiency in a project. We start with those energy efficient tables. So we are looking for the main equipment. How efficient can we make the main equipment, the heating and cooling, the compressorized equipment, the heat rejection equipment, the boilers, etc. Those will all be contained in the table. So you can look in the table, you can get an efficiency as your target, and you can hopefully at least you have to meet that requirement, and hopefully you can beat that requirement and your building will be more efficient than a standard building. Now, we do not push the envelope on those codes, on those minimum efficiency requirements, because they are the minimum requirement for any building built in America. So you can always beat those requirements on the market, and it should help you to save a little energy. But it does set a floor, and in general, once the federal government accepts our requirements, the manufacturers stop making equipment worse than that, because there's not many people that can buy it. Now, once we get our equipment as efficient as we can, then we start working on how they operate. So we next look at the fans and the pumps. So we've written many rules on how to reduce fan energy or how to control fans, and also pumps, because those are the distribution systems. So, and the second biggest user of power in the HVAC system, the distribution of the fans and the pumps. Then we look at controls, and we try to make sure that we have controls that operate the system in an efficient manner. And the way I look at it is, all we've done before on this equipment sizing is we set a demand. So if those units run full blast, then we've set a kW demand, the maximum for that building. But by using controls, we can limit the amount of times they would ever have to run fully loaded. And also we can say when we can turn them on and off when the building's unoccupied. So the controls are a very key part of trying to control energy use once we've used efficient systems and minimized the size of those systems. And that's the next important thing, or really it comes up front when we minimize made the best walls, the best windows, the best lighting, the most efficient process equipment as far as heat rejection, and we've really lowered the size of that HVAC system. We've controlled it properly, and we bought very efficient equipment to run in it. Then we've done what we can do to reduce energy use in the building. There's two equations that always will make sure, whether you're an engineer, an architect, a lighting designer, that you at least have seen before and have some idea of what's going on. First off is water size load. This water size load, this is again Q and BTUs, which I hate to say in front of architects because they roll their eyes, but BTUs equals 500 times delta T times GPM. So if you're running through a chiller and it's going to cool water from 55 degrees to 45 degrees, that's a 10-degree delta T, and then the GPM that go through it, you multiply that times 500, and that's the total air conditioning load that water can handle. Now, that's water side. Now, if we're air side, Then we're going to talk about sensible load. The reason we do that is because most rooms have a thermostat in them. Most rooms do not have a humidistat in them. So the sensible load is really what controls most air conditioning airside systems. So on this, it's 1.08 times a CFM through some delta T. Now, if it's a delta T across a cooling coil, it'll be what's shown here, mixed air minus supply air. But if it's a delta T in your room, it would be the supply air of the air coming in your room minus the temperature, or it would actually be the temperature of the thermostat is set at for cooling minus the supply air temperature. If it was for heating, it would be the opposite, the supply air temperature minus the temperature that the heating thermostat was set in. But anyway, I'm sorry, anyway, what we're trying to say is that is what the delta T is, and that's an important delta T because actually that's how you size CFM. So you move that equation around, you divide it, you say you've got a load divided by 1.08 divided by delta T, and that's exactly how much CFM you blow in a room. And so by varying your delta T, you can vary your CFM, which impacts your fans. Of course, but it also would maybe affect your major equipment also. But these are the things that we mainly play with to see if we can make our system most effective and most energy efficient. Now, minimum efficiency, there are 13 tables. That means 13 different types of equipment, and some of those tables have several subcategories of equipment in them. But there's basically 13 categories. When, as I said earlier, when one or more, if the equipment is not listed or is operated outside the listed range, it can be used without requirements. And if there are more than one requirement listed in the standard, then you have to comply with both requirements, such as boilers could have standby losses, things like that. So load calculations. Now, we require you to run a load, and you need to turn that load over to the authority having jurisdiction if they ask for it. You need to check a box on ComCheck to say, yes, I ran the load, and then seal and sign that ComCheck form. But basically, we don't make you do anything with that load. We don't say, okay, you ran a load and now you cannot use more any equipment larger than that. We don't say any of those things. All we say is we want you as a design professional to know what the load for that building is, and then design a good system that with that knowledge. Like again, some of the other standards or codes will require you to use that to size your equipment, but we don't in the prescriptive part of this system. Of course, if you use an Appendix G, there's a whole other set of rules for running that model and what you do with that model. Now, added in 2010, we also require you to do the pump head calculation to the most pressure drop in the hydraulic line to the most remote unit or remote load for the critical circuit. Now, in VAVs, it may require you to run more than one path, but basically, we want you to know that you're sizing that pump properly, that you've done a calculation to say what the pump head's going to be. Now, we push water-cooled equipment. So we think that would save the most energy. Now, of course, in a small building, and there's many, we regulate DX equipment, we regulate rooftops, we know they're used everywhere, but we push just because of the energy efficiency of water-cooled equipment. We don't play favorites because every time, we have everyone on the looking and everyone on the committee, but we think that's the most efficient. But we have to be careful that we don't do things to cause one system to have an advantage in the marketplace. Now, so I've done a little sketch here to help think about the differences in water cooled and air cooled. So here we have a cooling tower over here, and a cooling tower is regulated by the size of the fan versus the GPM it's going to handle. So that's what the efficiency requirements in the code are, and we'll look at those a little closer in a minute. So now we have a pump. We have a condenser water pump serving the cooling tower. Now, this condenser water pump does not exist in air-cooled equipment, so it's an energy user that the efficiency of the chiller will have to overcome. Also, this fan is for the cooling tower is fairly large, where all these little fans for an air-cooled chiller are not generally use as much energy as this big fan. So we are at a negative here on the chiller. But then when we get to the chiller, it is a fairly efficient piece of equipment. And we can look at that. Nope. And then we have the chill water pumps, which are pretty much the same for both air-cooled and water-cooled. So I'm showing a 500-ton water-cooled system and a 200-ton air-cooled system. Now, hopefully, when we look at that chiller, the air-cooled chiller will run at approximately, a full load chiller would run at approximately 1.24 kW per ton at a 16.1 IPLV. Now, a manufacturer will tell you you're cheating a little bit because of the test procedures at are quite the same for air-cooled as water-cooled, but basically this is as good a comparison as a standard engineer that doesn't work for a chiller manufacturer can run. So then we look at a water-cooled chiller, and it's way down at 0.585 kW per ton and a 0.38 IPLV. Again, that's 500-ton chiller versus a 200-ton chiller. So if we load that up into the same sketch, and we see that we have the 5.85, and from Appendix G, I'm pulling out the required baseline energy use for the pumps and the fans and for both systems. So we would have 19 watts per GPM on a condenser water pump. We'd have 22 watts on a chill water pump. We'd have 40.2 watts per GPM on the cooling tower. Again, the big difference is this 0.585 versus the 1.24. So we would end up with a total system in this just little example of 0.80 versus a 1.28 for the air cooled. Now again, there's lots of holes in this, and you know, as a real designer working on a real building, you know it's not quite this easy. But I just want to give you kind of a high level look at the difference in the water cooled and the air cooled. Now the water cooled again uses water, and you can see that if you're looking at the cost, the cooling tower uses quite a bit of water, and your real calculation, of course, you would have to put in the cost of water and try to make sure you covered that. So new for 2016, we're going to stay on the chill water or the hydronic side for a little while. New for 2016, chill water coil selection. This is a big change, and this is a big deal. Water side delta T, minimum of 15 degrees, with leaving water temperature a minimum of 57 degrees. So that means that you leave the coil at 57 or above, and so that means you enter the coil at 42 or above. So that allows you to have cold water, if you're worried about humidity control, coming out of your chiller at the same time as it is, you know, it doesn't go too low. 54, we had a big argument over 54 and 52 on that bottom side, and us people, I'm from Texas, and so I worry about humidity control all the time. We were allowed to we won that argument to keep it a little bit lower at 42 instead of 44 is a coldest temperature allowed. So you can see both. This is a big rule. It affects the chill water temperature. It affects how big your coils are, and there are some exceptions. Too many rolls, if that results in you having ASHRAE 62, when you get around 10 rolls, have a problem with pressure drop and cleaning the coils, so you have to watch that. But as long as you do it with 8-roll coil, you have no problems. Too small if the unit's less than 5,000 CFM. If it's a constant volume system, then we don't require you to do this. Coil selected at maximum delta T allowed by a chiller. So if you've got an existing chiller and so your chiller just can't do it, we won't make you do it. And passive coils, which are, you don't want to use very cold water, and passive coils in general, this would be like a chilled beam. Entering water temperature above 50 degrees. If you've got some kind of process or something that you're always using warmer water, and warmer water is going to save a lot of energy at the chiller, then we're going to not make you do it at the coil. Entering air temperature is below 65, so you're using, that would require you to use colder water coming in, and so you couldn't keep that minimum temperature. So I'm going to give you your second break of 5 minutes now. My clock says it's X07, so at X012 we will expect you back, and I'll start back up, or I'll say 13 to give you the few seconds we might lose. So I will see you back here at, for me it's 2:13, and wherever you are in the world. Thanks. Please send some questions in. We've only had one question all day. I'm sure you're getting bored. Okay, I'm back. So next, under the prescriptive section, we have condenser heat recoveries for surface water heating. Now, this has been in the standard for 1,000 years. It was originally designed for prisons mostly, or hospitals maybe, but this is this is using your chiller to heat water to use, or any kind of condenser heat, but normally it'd be a chiller because of the size of this stuff, to heat water for service water heating. Now, the requirements are that the facility is operated 24 hours a day. It has a heat rejection of greater than 6 million BTUs. It has a service water heating load of greater than 1 million BTUs. You must provide the smaller of 60% of heat rejection or preheat peak service water to 85 degrees. So you're either going to serve, you're either going to use up 60% of your heat rejection, or you're going to heat the water up to 85 degrees using service water heating. There's exceptions for site recovery and solar energy that are used using over 30% of the peak condenser load for space heating at design conditions. And that turns out to be a key problem in this one, in that just right now, the requirement is for service water heating loads. Now, matching a chiller to service water heating loads is very difficult to do efficiently. So we're trying to rewrite this requirement and add some space heating into it so we can have a constant load that would make sense to match the chiller up to. But this is in the standard, and if your building happens to fall under these requirements which trigger it, which is the heat rejection of 6 million, service water heating load of 1 million, and the 24 hours per day, you have to use it for the water heating, but you probably do want to go ahead and put in some other loads so that you can have a nice even load for the chillers to work against. I was recently doing a plant that was a pharmaceutical type plant, and they have washdown times. So they use a tremendous amount of service water heating one time a day in the afternoon, in the between shifts in the evening, where they wash a lot of equipment down. Well, but the requirements of 90.1, which I help write, unfortunately, it doesn't have an exception saying, well, wait, if you're only using that 1 million BTUs for 2 hours a day, and wait, it's actually a manufacturing plant, but service water heating. Now, since I work on it, I could maybe raise the thing saying, well, service water heating is not the same thing as this process water, but being a engineer, and I could argue with myself, but wait a minute, I'm using it to wash the equipment down. It's not really in the process, it's in the cleanup, which is exactly what service water heating is. So I didn't want to use heat recovery on that project because obviously I have a giant peak only one time a day, but I had to work my way around and out of the problem. And it's, I knew the intent wasn't to do that, but what you find out is when you work on the committee, you can intend something, you can write it into the code, someone asks you for an interpretation of it, and you cannot go back to your intent. You have to read what's written there, and you have to answer his question based on where you ended up, even if everybody in the room is sitting there saying, but that's not what we meant. We don't really want that. You cannot, that's what everyone voted for. That's what we sent it out for public review. The words we actually used were what were public reviews and what went into the standard. So we don't have the freedom to say, yeah, but that's not really what we meant. We have to read it ourselves and talk about it, and then we sometimes give terrible answers to people when they ask for interpretations just because we we worded something a certain way or did not include the exception. And it also drives us to update the code and make changes so that that doesn't continue to be a problem. Okay, heat rejection equipment. For 2016, we made some changes, and this applies to all fans over 5 horsepower now. First time we dropped from 7.5, and now with first time we've also required uh, drives of variable speed drives. Before we just required a reduction. Now we're required demand reduction of 30% wattage at 50% airflow, which to meet that requirement, you're probably going to have to use a variable speed drive. Automatically change speeds to control leaving temperature, not above, not required in climate zones 1 or 2. Now we've removed that, so they are now required in climate zones 1 and 2. Before, these are the 2 hottest climate zones, or they used to be the hottest climate zones. Now climate zone 0 is the hottest climate zone. But the but we have run models that show that using variable speed drives on cooling towers will save money even in climate zones 1 and 2. There are some overfeed condenser systems and ammonia systems and things that we don't require you to use have these requirements for. Multi-cell towers run. We tell you in the standard that multi-cell towers run all the fans you can and all at the same speed. So, we knew you have to turn down and turn off as you turn off chillers because you've got minimum flow requirements over the top of the tower and stuff. But we want you to keep as much wet surface as you possibly can and run the fans as slow as you can to save as much energy. Because once you purchase that surface area on that cooling tower, then you might as well use it. And again, if we can slow the fans down over the biggest area, that's the most efficient way to do it. And we do not use centrifugal fans on open towers over 1,100 GPM unless ducted. So if you have to use a centrifugal fan because the cooling tower is in the basement and you got to duck it out of the basement and you need that static pressure, then you can do it. But if you're just setting a tower outside just like you would any other tower, then you can't. Then it is so inefficient to use the centrifugal fan that we don't allow it. Towers must turn down to handle the smallest pump or 50% design flow. That's kind of hard to read, and you have to work on that one a little bit. But what we're saying is pretty much what I was saying before, that that as you cycle off cooling towers, that you have to match the pumps up with them, and that your pumps can pretty much run a couple of towers maybe at minimum flow, and make sure you can handle the turn down. Performance requirements for heat rejection equipment. So I'm showing you this to show you the difference in a centrifugal fan and a propeller fan. So a propeller fan, a normal fan, can handle 40.2 GPM per horsepower, where a centrifugal fan can handle a little bit less than half of that, 20 GPM per horsepower. So you can see that that's not a very efficient way to go for your cooling towers. Boiler efficiency. This is the boiler efficiency table. Now, you can see that the boiler manufacturers want as much notice of when they're going to have to change their product and test it and go through all the process of getting new efficiency numbers for their equipment. So you can see that we've got the boiler manufacturers, which there's a lot of things they have to do to change their efficiencies and get them tested and everything. We've given them numbers for 2020. So here are the current minimum efficiency numbers in the first column, and in the second column, we've said they're going to go to this number in 2020. Now you can see that the difference is minute, if any. there's only one gas-fired natural draft that shows anything. It looks like it's getting a little less efficient. Anyway, this is this is what we have to do to deal with the manufacturers, is the manufacturers do need to be able to work in advance. Now, we did, and I think I'll have a slide on it later, we did, for large boilers, for the first time require condensing boilers for very large boilers. We did that in 2013. Okay, so the next section of the presentation will be on hydronic system design and control. This will include boiler turn down, hydronic variable flow systems, chiller and boiler isolation, chilled and hot water temperature reset controls, hydronic heat pumps and water-cooled unitary conditioners, and then pipe sizing. So we'll finish up the water side, then we'll go to air, and then we'll go to air side. Okay, new for 2013. So this was the last edition of code that you should be using now. We defined pipes. We had never defined pipes before. The pipes are tubes interconnecting the various parts of a fluid distribution system, including all elements that are in series with the fluid flow, such as pumps, valves, strainers, and air separators, but not including elements that are not in series with the fluid flow, such as expansion tank fill lines, chemical feeders, and drains. So now you know what piping is, and the reason we did that was because we require you to insulate all piping. So you have to insulate the heads of the pumps, valve strainers, and separators, but not the expansion tank fill lines or chemical feeders and drains. So now we've helped define what we mean by piping when we talk about insulation. We also have requirements for pipe sizing. Now, we're trying to control the amount of energy used in pumping. Now, you've got a pump, and a pump can pump to one air handler right next to it. It can pump across a whole building to an air handler far, far away. The pump can do many things. So it's very difficult to regulate. So what we decided to do was to try to have some reasonable amount of head pressure put on that pump by setting a maximum flow rate that you can flow through a pipe. So based on this, how often the system runs, whether it's less than 2,000 hours per year, greater than 2,000, less than 4,400 hours, or greater than 4,400, and when you start figuring that out, this is a pretty close to a 24/7 operation, and so you can kind of see that most things would fall in the middle, and some things would fall on the bottom. But anyway, since a variable speed pump would not operate at full flow most of the time, we gave a more flow allowance through the variable speed, and then based on your pipe size, this tells you the maximum GPM that can flow through. Now, it is not that aggressive. It's got very reasonable choices, and if you look at it, you probably would have sized. You probably might size your pipe a little, with a little less flow, a little more conservative than this, or a little. You might make your pipe bigger than is required, because just because of the way your office works, and if you make it bigger, obviously, then you're not going to use as much energy, and you have less pressure drop on your pumps. So this is a minimum standard. Now, HVAC system construction and insulation. These are still mandatory requirements, and for insulation, we have some general requirements, and then we have duct and plenum insulation per tables 682 A and B. Now, duct insulation is based on what's going through the duct, whether it's a heating duct, a cooling duct, or a heating and cooling duct, and where that duct's located. So if it's in conditioned space, we have a different requirement than if it's exposed on the roof. So that's the way that table breaks down. Now, piping insulation per table 683, 1 and 2. we require you to insulate a pipe that has water or liquid cooler than 60 degrees or hotter than 105 degrees, because between those two, 60 and 105, for energy purposes only, you won't pay back the cost of the insulation. Now, there's other reasons to insulate it, such as sweating, etc., that you might want to insulate it. If you have a sensible heating panel, this would be look like a roof tile, but it would either have hydraulic heat on the back or electric heat, and it would be a radiant panel. You have to insulate the back of that tile so that you're not heating the floor above, so you're doing the work that you meant to. Same thing with radiant floor heating. If you have a radiant floor slab that is, you're walking on it, you're on the second floor of the building, then you have to insulate the bottom of that slab so that you're not actually heating the first floor of the building instead of what you're intending to heat. Now, this is not the slab on grade. We do not require heat in the slab on grade. You can put heat in, and we have insulation requirements for the edge of slab based on whether you put heat in it or not. But the insulation, I'm sorry, we don't require you to insulate the bottom underneath the slab for slab on grade. We do require sometimes well, okay. Now, ducts and plenum leakage. Duct sealing, all duct pressure class ratings shall be designated on the drawing. So you've got to show what the duct class rating is. That would be the pressure that's in the duct. And then all sealing must be, no matter what that pressure class rating is, it's class A. So if you look at SMACNA, it's got class A, B, and C type duct sealing. We want you to seal the duct to class A all over the building. We met with the contractors, and if it's that simple where they know that they got class A everywhere, it pays back. They're not charging much extra. It's purely, they're going to seal it. And duct leakage is a tremendous energy loser. So we want it all sealed to class A. And duct leakage test, if you put your little symbol on there that you're going to have this length of duct at over 3 inches of static, then you have to test that. You have to have a duct leakage test for those sections of the duct over 3 inches of static, and you have to, there's requirements in the standard about how much leakage you can have and what percentage of the duct you have to test. So cold pipe insulation. So this is the actual table. This is table 3.2. And it shows you for cold pipe between 60 and 40 degrees, and then less than 40 degrees, what the required thickness is. You can see that we don't, this is not, these are minimum requirements. Now, when you read the words underneath, you can see that fiberglass is the basis of this table, and this item A is this equation you have to use. You need to pay attention to that, because if you have conductivity outside this range of 21 to 27 or from 20 to 26, then you have to use this equation, and this equation, because of the exponent, can cause your thickness to expand pretty rapidly. So you need to be aware of that equation and make sure you plan on using it unless you're between the conductivity ranges of the table. Hot pipe insulation is similar. It's got the same requirements, and it's based on fiberglass, but we've got a more breakdown from 105 to 140 all the way up to above 350. We have different requirements, and obviously as you get hotter and hotter, it pays off to have more and more insulation. Now, I've done a strikeout and red line of this requirement. Variable flow required for systems. So we're taking the 2013, we're marking it up for the 2016. So this kicks in if you have more than 3 control valves. So you have to have something to vary the flow before it pays off to vary the flow. So you have to have 3 control valves. Now, you have to put in a variable speed pump, a variable speed drive, 30% design wattage at 50% flow for pump sizes per table, and I'll show you the table. So if you're in that table, you have to put in a variable speed drive. You can use some hydraulic clutches and everything for pumps, but you have to meet that requirement. Modulate to, and it used to be less than 50% design flow, now it's 25% or minimum allowed by the manufacturer. So that means that if you got a chiller, you're going to slow that sucker down to 25% unless your manufacturer says I can't stand it less than 30% flow, and that'll restrict where you slow this pump down to. Because it's always when you buy a drive and you get set up for variable speed, you have to make sure that you're varying it through a range that makes sense, or you won't get your paybacks. Controlled is a function of flow or pressure differential at the end of the system with set point not more than 110% of the critical circuit pressure drop and DDC set point reset. So remember where I had told you had to calculate the critical circuit pressure drop? Now you have to use that by not setting that controller at the most remote point at more than 110% of the pressure you calculated. So we have to have that set point. Now we know you've got a good design based on your calculations. Now, what is now you use or with DDC a function of valve position. So that means you're going to look at all the valves in the system, and depending on if that valve is still has some room to open, you'll continue to slow down that pump. Once one valve reaches full open and is starving and it can't get enough water flow, you have to speed up the pump so that you can satisfy that load. So if you always keep one valve 100% open in the system, and you've done a good job of setting up the system so that one valve is not forcing the pump to work all the time just because it's the pipe's got tied in a knot to it or something, you need to make sure there's what's going on there, then you're going to have the most efficient system you can possibly have. Now, the valve position would normally, when the valve's full open, it would actually go and change the set point on that critical circuit pressure drop at the end of the run. That way you can dampen out the reactions, because if you're just tracking the valves, it's very difficult on your control system. But if you're changing that set point, and that set point is controlling the pump, and you have some function there to kind of dampen it out in your control sequence, then you can get a very quality control system. Exceptions, variable speed not required when 50% of the heat is from electric boilers. That has to do with the way electric boilers work. On primary pumps in primary secondary systems, so the pump that just is in the plant and just circulates through the chillers, that pump won't need to be variable speed if you put in a primary secondary system. Coil pump for freeze protection or heat recovery coil. So if you're running a little pump to continuously circulate the water in a coil, you normally want to run that at a certain velocity so that you can make sure you do not freeze the coil, so we don't make you put a variable speed drive on that one. Here's the table we talked about. So depending on your climate zone and whether you're a chill water pump or a hot water pump, then based on the horsepower of the pump, this lets you know when you have to use a variable speed drive. So if you're in 3A and you've got a chill water pump in 3A, you're going to use it. If you've got a heating water pump in 7 or 8A that's greater than 5 horsepower, you're going to use it. So you're going to 5 horsepower is the brake for this middle part, and then you can see it's 7.5 when you get a little bit colder zones or a little bit a little bit colder zones, we're going to jump up to 7.5. You can see how it works. So as you can see, it's based on what we think the number of hours it would run. So prescriptive, this is the hydronic system design and control, pump isolation. So in the plant, in the central plant, whenever you turn off a chiller or a boiler, you have to turn off the associated pump. If it's a series chiller, so that you have two chillers working together, you can you don't have to try to bypass one of the chillers. If one goes down, you can still pump through the series. Chillers and boilers with constant speed pumps on headers shall have no less than the same number of pumps as the chillers, so that we can turn off a pump each time we turn off a chiller or a boiler. Chilled and hot water reset based on load indicator. So if you've got we're going to do a reset of the temperature of the chilled or hot water, and we're going to do that on systems greater than 300,000 BTUs. We used to have a big loophole that said results in improper operation. We've done away with that one, and now we say if it's purchased chilled or hot water. If you're purchasing the water and you're not getting the advantage of the chiller or the boiler being able to back off because of the temperature change, you have no advantage in your building to do a reset, because all they will do is speed up your fans. So we don't require you to do it. Variable flow systems, specific temperature required for the process. So we used to say if you put in a variable flow, if you put in a variable speed drive, we wouldn't make you do a reset. We took that away, and we said if you've got some kind of process where you can't do a reset connected to the same chiller or boiler, then we won't make you reset it. Or if you're using the valve position as used for flow control. So this is again where we're looking at the position of the valve, because once you do the reset, obviously a lot of the valves are going to go full open, and it's going to cause you to have to dampen out a whole big system. A lot of crazy things happen, so we won't make you do it. All right, variable refrigerant flow. In 2010, we added variable refrigerant flow systems to the tables. So they are covered. They do have minimum efficiency rating. But the problem is, because the way variable refrigerant flow systems work is they're most efficient when they have the diversity, and you're using a system that allows the one condenser to use different refrigerant flows to the different units, and you have this diversity. But the people that test this equipment, I don't do it, so I'm just assuming that they don't have a good way to test them, what diversity to use. So as far as our requirements that are based on the testing procedure, these efficiencies are fairly low. The IER for a 12.9 is 12.9 for a split system, and it's 13.1 for a VRF system. Basically the same. So, and you know that with the diversity and all, the manufacturers are telling you you're going to do a lot better than that. So I'm not sure that they're getting a fair shake in the way they're being tested and the way we're doing it. But on the same, you're as a designer, you're going to have to figure out exactly, you're going to have to use these minimums, but figure out exactly when to use variable refrigerant flow systems. Dedicated outside air systems. We've never bothered with dedicated or had separate requirements for dedicated outside air systems to 2016. Now we do have those requirements. The requirement is, so we had to come up with new terms, and we worked with ARI or AHRI to come up with these terms and these requirements. And it was kind of a battle, because this is again regulating something that wasn't regulated. A seasonal efficiency number that is combined value based on the formula listed in ASHRAE Standard 920, that's a testing procedure, of the four humidification moisture removal efficiency ratings required for DX/DOAS units, expressed in pounds of moisture, kWh per hour. And again, we do the same thing with integrated seasonal system control. You can read that is for coefficient of performance values for the heating season, DX/DOAS unit, air or water source removal, because we think that a big part of the requirements for DOS is not just how efficient they are on sensible cooling. It has a lot to do with removal of moisture from the air is one of the reasons we're using it. So we have some new requirements. Now, here is the requirement in the table for DX DOAS units, and we have our efficiencies, our minimum efficiencies in listed here at ISMRE, and these are without energy recovery systems. So that's the minimum efficiency, and then here is another table with energy recovery systems, and you can see the minimum efficiency is higher. So those are now covered, and they're part of the requirements of the code. Now we're going to go still in the mandatory section, but we're going to spend a little bit of time in controls and diagnostics. So the first thing is, again, here's a table that tells you what the mandatory control requirements are, so you can find them fast. Zone thermostatic controls, deadband, set point overlap restrictions, off-hour controls, automatic shutdown, setback controls, optimum start controls, and zone isolation. So the setback is changed for the first time in a long time in 2016. From 2004 to 2013, what we said was that we were going to have heating setbacks in climate zones 2 through 8, and the setback was going to be 55 degrees. In climate zones 1B, 2B, and 3B, we were going to have setup, which means that at night when the building's unoccupied, then we would let the temperature of the system float up to 90 degrees. Now, the requirements, the setup and setbacks were given for the manufacturer. So the manufacturer had to give you a system where you could set the setback and heating to 55 unoccupied building and the setup to 90 unoccupied building. The requirement did not say you had to use those as your set points. It just required they had to be available to you. So if you want to set up your building to 65 degrees or 70 degrees at night, you can do that. It's legal. You can do that, because what you have to worry about is the recovery. The next morning, my system needs to recover, and when it needs to be comfortable when people come in. But of course, the more you set it back, the more energy you save. So you have the dial, you have the capability to go as high as 90 degrees. You might not be able to recover from there, so it might be a bad idea. Now, in 2016, we say all zones at least 10 degrees below heating set point. That would be the occupied heating set point. So if you were heating the building to 65, it would be 55, and at least 5 degrees above the cooling set point. So if you were cooling the building to 75 or 78, 75 is easier for me, it would be 80 degrees. So, hotel, motel, guest rooms, new for 2016. We have some controls for hotel and motel guest rooms. If you have a motel or hotel with over 50 guest rooms, you have to have set point control. If the room is unoccupied for 30 minutes, you got to reset the set point 4 degrees up and down based on the season. Unoccupied and unrented. So now that's not just unoccupied for 30 minutes, it's unoccupied and unrented. You've got to go up to 80 degrees and you got to go down to 60 degrees. Now, vent control. This is the bathroom vent. Exhaust and outside air supply will automatically be shut down or off within 30 minutes of room being unoccupied. That ties in with the reset. Captive key card. If you have a captive key card system, comply with these. These need to be set up to comply with the requirements, but that is one way to make the requirement, and we do accept captive key cards, which is that slot. If you've traveled outside the country, normally you put your hotel room key into a slot next to the door, and it turns on the lights and everything. You pull it out, and suddenly you're in the dark. It makes it hard to charge your computer while you're at dinner. Enclosed parking garage ventilation. Provide a system to automatically detect contaminant levels and adjust the fan speed accordingly. this fan must be able to reduce fan speed to 50% or less. So this is a parking lot garage ventilation. There's no cars moving around in the parking lot, and so so you slow the fan down, and when cars start moving around and dumping contaminant, then you speed the fans back up. The exceptions are for garages less than 30,000 square feet, or and with no mechanical heating or cooling. So if you've got mechanical heating and cooling, even if you're less than 30, you have to do it. Where the square foot from horsepower is less than, or 15,000, where the square foot per horsepower should be less than, shouldn't it? 15,000, no, greater than, that makes sense. So you're going to do greater square feet than horsepower of 1,500. So you'd have 1,600 square feet covered by 1 horsepower of fan, or if the HGAC doesn't, the authority having jurisdiction won't let you do this. Now, most of the codes let you do this, and it's rare to find someone who won't. Heating and cooled vestibules. In 2016, we added the cooling. Heating allowed only when the outdoor temperature is below 45 degrees and with a maximum set point temperature of 60 degrees. Cooling minimum set point of 85 degrees. Now, we do have good exception for using transfer air. So if you bring air that you were going to exhaust anyway from the cooled and heated part of the building, then we don't have these requirements for minimum and maximum temperature set point at all for the room. So reusing that air and then exhausting it out this way instead of out of an exhaust fan is much better, more efficient, and will make you more comfortable, or your customers more comfortable. DDC controls. In 2013, we decided that most systems use DDC controls, most new systems. And that instead of us writing requirements for standard controls or for pneumatic controls or something, and then making exceptions for when you're using DDC controls, we were going to write requirements for DDC controls and then write exceptions if you did not have DDC controls. So our approach is that everybody has them now. So DDC systems should be capable of all the following as required to provide the control logic requirements for section 6.5, which is we have a lot of requirements, prescriptive requirements for DDC controls. This is a mandatory control of the things DDC must include. Monitoring zone and system demand for fan pressure, pump pressure, and heating and cooling. Transferring that information, the zone information and system demand information, from zones to air distribution system controllers, and from air distribution systems to heating and cooling plant controllers, automatically detecting those zones and systems that may be excessively driving the reset logic and generating an alarm or other indication of to the system operator. And then readily allowing that operator to remove those zones from the reset algorithm. Now, why this is important to us is that we have a lot of those requirements in the prescriptive section, and you've seen a couple of them already about like the valve position. So if you had one valve stuck wide open in that system, then that control logic that we were using to say slow the pump down until one valve until there are no valves 100% open. I mean, speed the pump up until there's none 100% open, slow it down as long as there aren't any. You got one valve stuck 100% open, and now that pump's going to keep speeding up forever, and we're going to lose all of our energy savings because that valve's stuck open. So this requires the control system to identify that valve is not modulating, that it's stuck open, that it's controlling everything, and automatically detect it, report it to the operator so the operator can easily push a button and say that one valve is not going to be included in our calculation for our pump speed until we get it fixed, and then go fix the valve. All right, so economizers are the next part of the section we're going to cover. Now, the economizers are the start of the prescriptive section. So that's 6.5. So we're in 6.5 now. I'm going to do 2 more slides, and then we will have a little talk, and then we'll close down, because that'll get us right to the middle, and we'll do the same number of slides when we come back on the 7th. So economizers are required for all systems that are bigger than 54,000 BTUs in every place in the world except for uh, climate zones 0 and 1. In America, there are no 0 Bs or 1 Bs. There are 0 As and 1 As, and there's actually no 0 As in America either. There's 1A at the tip of Florida and at the tip of Texas. Now, 2016 is the first time that that there has been any in Texas, and there's more in Florida. We'll go into that. I think Joe's going to go into that when he does the envelope. But in 20, we've added climate zone 0, and we've upgraded the weather to include the because the weather's changed. So we'll go into that. Like I say, I'll let Joe have all the thunder on that one. And but basically that's where economizers. Now you can get out of using economizers if you use equipment that's this much more efficient than that required in the tables. So if you happen to be in climate zone 2A, which is a hot climate zone, and you pick an air conditioner that's 17% more efficient than the air conditioner that we require in the book, in the mandatory requirements, then you do not need to put an economizer in. Now you can do that. That's easy. That's fairly easy to do. It'll cost you a little money, but it will save you the same amount of money as an economizer. So if you've got some reason you hate economizers, which a lot of people in climate zone 2A do hate economizers because of the amount of humidity it brings in, then you can do that. Now you can see that this is for cooling. You know, the economizer works for cooling. So as you get in the colder and colder climates, it's harder and harder because you don't run the cooling as often, but you have a tremendous amount of time that economizer will cool the building. Then it gets harder and harder to do away with economizer for efficiency reasons. So, this is the table that tells you when to turn off your economizer. So you've started your economizer at some break temperature that you think it's that will work for your mix of outside air and inside air, and you're running your economizer. We require you to keep that economizer on till it reaches these numbers based on what type of control. So if you have a fixed dry bulb temperature type economizer, you leave it on till the outside air temperature is 75 degrees. Now remember, if your return air is less than 75, you would be losing a little money there, but in general, where we have our set points, it shouldn't be. But if we did, you just wouldn't use the fixed dry bulb temperature requirement if you thought you were in that situation. You would use a differential dry bulb, so it would say that the temperature outside air is greater than the temperature of return air, and that would work for you. You can use the fixed enthalpy. You can use those at any climate zone. The fixed dry bulb temperature has a few climate zones that it's not allowed, and that's because of if you would have to lay it out on a psych table and see that sometimes because of humidity that you're actually not getting the most efficient system. And then differential enthalpy with fixed dry bulb temperature, which is which then you would say outdoor air enthalpy exceeds return air enthalpy, or outdoor air temperature exceeds. So this is a way you can look at humidity and temperature. And because of fixed humidity or any kind of enthalpy any kind of enthalpy control, unless it's very expensive, will tend to be one of your big maintenance items and maybe not be reading correctly. This is a good way we added this fixed dry bulb to it, so at least if it wasn't reading correctly, it would not cost so much energy. All right, so that means it's 2:58 and time to, yes.
There are two questions from a Jordan Blankenship having to do with, one says dry bulb or enthalpy economizer. He didn't cite which slide he was referring to. And then he said, I actually read an ASHRAE article quite a while back that championed only using dry bulb economizer. What are your thoughts?
Okay, that's what this table's reacting to, really, because again, we allow fixed enthalpy or differential enthalpy, but we've added with fixed dry bulb temperature, Now, that's because many people want to look at it, enthalpy would be the right thing to look at if you could trust the control, because it combines both humidity and temperature to give you total energy. And so if we could trust those controllers, they would be great. But we really, that article pointed out that that they're the least reliable one, especially the the small packaged ones and things like that. You can buy a very expensive one for the total building and maybe use it, and it'll work out for you. But that's why we've added this dry bulb temperature, because we agree that that dry bulb is more reliable, and it really if we want to use the economizers, the controls have to work, and if the enthalpy sensor's not working, then we're not going to save the energy we intended to. So I personally, since you asked my opinion, this is not from the standard or from the code. I use a dry bulb economizer with a humidity override in critical spaces. So I put a humidity sensor somewhere in the building or somewhere in the unit, depending on what the design is, and if it gets too much humidity, then I override the dry bulb. So it's close to the fixed enthalpy, because but it's a little bit different. Okay, thank you very much. That was our 3 hours today. Joe, do you got anything to add?
No, not today. More to add next Tuesday. See you all next Tuesday.
All right, thank you.
There are a few more questions we can get to next time.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.